What genre is better at transporting you to another world? The one that builds an independent secondary world of unique character that we can immerse ourselves in, or the one with a character from our world that we connect with on their journey to this new world, but they constantly disrupt it and remind us of our own universe? And here's a second question. What's the point of escapism anyway? Are we being sad little losers when engaging in this kind of thing? Shouldn't we focus on reality? If we're so bored, upset, or crushed by our circumstances that we want to escape them, then isn't distracting ourselves with big-titty elf waifus the very thing keeping us from getting it together and facing reality head-on to change it? An uncomfortable line of questioning to be sure, but an important one. Let me know your personal opinions in the comments, by the way. This is an important conversation for nerds and weebs alike. I do think that some stories take escapism too far. The protagonist is made bland because you're meant to insert yourself and imagine your average attributes and hobbies turning you into an overpowered badass for no reason. You like fantasy content? Now all those hours you pissed away consuming fictional lore armed you with the knowledge to excel in this new world that just happens to follow fantasy rules. You have a smartphone? Now you have an endless supply of waifus. You play video games? Now you can unlock unlimited power! I mean, why not be an overpowered Chad who gets isekai'd into a game world just by watching YouTube? You know, you just doom scrolling one day and clicked on a magical link under a video and then boom! You find yourself in a dark fantasy multiplayer video game world like an overlord. With beautiful warrior maidens under your command and Chad bro companions of every race. Lizard demi-humans, elves, orcs, demon waifus, the works. To help you in a challenging world where you face off against other players who were also sent there. And you travel seamlessly between devices and use tactical upgrade systems. And then you realize, oh no! I've been isekai'd into Raid Shadow Legends! But it's okay, because I watched the full segment, so I gained all the perks to kick the tushy of all the noobs who skipped it and have become overpowered. Like having access to Ninja, as a super rare and one of the all-time strongest legendary champions who is once again redeemable as a limited edition champion between now and August 15, available only for new players. Remember to enter the promo code NINJARETURNS to get this shadowy shinobi and other useful in-game items. Existing players can get the free Ninja pack in the in-game shop by logging in for 5 days by August 15. But to really get into that Kirito vibe, you can actually win a virtual reality headset as well as a handheld gaming console and a drone as prizes. Just download and register to Raid Shadow Legends from my link or QR code. Then go to wefinallyplayedit.plarium.com and enter your Raid player ID. Record yourselves playing the game and upload your video to the event's website where you can see the other submissions and vote. The 12 top most voted submissions will win the prizes along with $2,000 Amazon gift cards. Everyone else will be entered into a draw for some valuable in-game digital loot, so no one needs to leave empty-handed. I actually like the community multiplayer aspect of the game because it's a fun way to connect with others through the clan system. I actually made a clan in the game that you guys can join. So get isekai'd into this world by clicking the link to also get the starter pack with a champion annex to fulfill your dream of being a skull warrior in a video game world, as well as the champion feign for those who reach level 15 and are going for that Rudius Grey Rat Beast People enthusiasm angle. But the magic only works if you click my link in the description to let them know I sent you. Or you can scan the QR code on screen. And if you do, I'll see you there. Feel free to join my clan called Pilgrims of the Past, though my raid name is Pilger because of a typo. I'll see you in the other world, main character. I firmly believe that there is nothing wrong with genuine escapism, as I'll define and explain throughout the video. However, distractions from reality are indeed a problem. Random schlock meant to distract you from your problems is often confused for escapism, but it's much less healthy and should definitely be avoided. The superficial wish fulfillment power fantasy that most isekai has become is a good example of the latter, which is unfortunate. It's a genre famous for morally dubious crap like protagonists who are a danger to children, or become advocates for literal slavery, or are mass murderers. Even very good wholesome isekai like Ascension of a Bookworm has that scene where the protagonist becomes the enthusiastic inventor of industrialized child labor as her solution to neglected orphans. The children yearn for the paper factory! You think I'm kidding? Look it up. The storytelling trope of a mundane character from our world stumbling into a new one of wonder and magic used to be seen as just one of the subgenres of fantasy, and it still kind of is. Why wouldn't it be? It's a trope that has been around since oral fairy tales made up by what I assume were Scandinavian grandmothers high on shrooms telling tales of little Roland entering fairyland to face the Elf King in the Dark Tower. And when the two legendary Oxford gentlemen, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, restructured the mythic fairy tale stories in respectable novel form by writing The Lord of the Rings and The Chronicles of Narnia, it was all indeed one genre. It was just fantasy, until it wasn't. Is it really fantasy when the protagonist is trapped in a virtual reality of Mark Zuckerberg's tech bro fever dream? Or is it science fiction? What if the protagonist is reincarnated as a fedora-tipping evil blonde demon child in an alternative World War I setting? What if the protagonist stumbles into a post-apocalyptic wasteland where a wretched humanity fights a hopeless war for water? Can we classify any of these as fantasy? Over the decades, the Japanese storytelling scene has helped to mature the trope of entering another world into its own genre. It's why they're the ones with the honor of naming it Isekai, literally meaning another world in Japanese. However, Isekai is still officially classified as a subgenre of fantasy, since it's the fantasy setting that is the most popular type of alternate world, but thinking of it in this way constrains the potential of Isekai, in my opinion. It's an immense potential that we forget the genre holds because it devolved into gamified power fantasies real quick, where the story gets quickly bogged down by hit points, mana debuffs, leveling up, and other video game logic tropes. When this is done in a fantasy setting that operates in a video game system for no reason, it can actually ruin the immersion into the story. Don't get me wrong, I love playing video games. I do it for escapism. And I watch Isekai to visit another world for escapism. But if I watch an isekai about someone escaping into a video game-like world, it can get very meta for me and I usually don't like it. Here's an idea. A video game where your character gets isekai'd into a video game. Oh! If I wanted to watch someone else play a video game, I'd go on Twitch because at least the boobies there are three-dimensional. Unless it's a VTuber, but that stuff is cursed. However, there's nothing wrong with isekais that use game mechanics if it makes sense because the setting is in a literal video game. Log Horizon is so beloved for a reason, and I made a whole video on why Sword Art Online is actually pretty good. Leave me alone! But that's because these stories are actually not about being distracted from reality into a singular fantasy tailor-made for the protagonist to indulge himself. They're actually about facing reality from another angle. In both Log Horizon and SAO, the characters encounter social breakdown, real conflict, and human brutality caused by despair. These characters actually experience a more real aspect of the human condition trapped in the game than when they lived in the safe, highly controlled routine of modern life in Japan. And we contemplate these human truths when we engage with these stories.
It's Lord of the Flies, but with autism.
For all the flack that SAO gets, it does this pretty well, where the isolated Kirito protagonist learns to come out of his gamer isolation and connect with people when faced with the reality of death in this virtual Hunger Games. He gets married, learns to work with a team, and even becomes a parent. It's great, at least in the first season. It kinda goes off the rails after that. But yeah, usually when the magic is just a game system with stats and levels, it doesn't feel real, which leads to the strengths of the fantasy genre. Many of the excesses of isekai are solved in fantasy because the latter is specifically about world building a reality that feels real and stands on its own, rather than focusing on the idea of someone just like us living in familiar worlds we've seen 1,000 times before. This is why fantasy stories have more intriguing worlds that feel more magical than 99% of isekai, most of whom are in a cardboard Dungeons and Dragons setting. Isekai focuses on the protagonist who shapes the world, and fantasy focuses on the world building that in turn shapes the protagonist. It's why when isekai wants to be different, they just change the nature of the person getting isekai'd. A spider, a slime, a flipping vending machine. But no, you idiots! Change the world! Change the world! Just look at Attack on Titan, Full Metal Alchemist, Avatar The Last Airbender, Game of Thrones, Arcane, The Auric Saga, Conan the Barbarian, The Witcher books. Heck, let's throw in some video game worlds there too, like Dark Souls, Elder Scrolls, Warhammer Fantasy, etc. These are all worlds that are very distinct from each other, even when they're inspired by Tolkien. You can look at a single picture or some footage and already tell where they're from. Even when the fantasy world is exactly like the standard isekai Dungeons and Dragons setting, like in Freerun, it's still about the world itself and appreciating it, which makes it feel more real. Fantasy revels in what Tolkien called the secondary world and how it works, which is what we now call in-universe world building. And magic is key for this in a good fantasy, or fairy story as Tolkien called it. It wasn't about power and leveling up your mana stats, but how it relates to the world around it. Open quote. The magic of fairy is not an end in itself. Its virtue is in its operations. Among these are the satisfaction of certain primordial human desires. One of these desires is to survey the depths of space and time. Another is to hold communion with other living things. A story may thus deal with the satisfaction of these desires, with or without the operation of either machine or magic, and in proportion as it succeeds, it will approach the quality and have the flavor of fairy story. J.R.R. Tolkien on fairy stories. It's because of this that science fiction stories like Dune or historical romances, like Vagabond, can still come across as fantasy because they do just this that Tolkien described. While Isekai stories often rely on established tropes to the point that the protagonist himself finds it cliché and uses it to speedrun plot points, it's ridiculous. You might think I'm being unfair here since we all know fantasy is filled to the brim with Tolkien and Dungeons & Dragons ripoffs, and there's so much fantasy schlock stories that are out there with the stock MacGuffin chasing, where the protagonist called Blandon of generic Kalia must find the Shuba Duba by traveling to the mountains of the Jalapena Colada in order to save the author's bank account. But even peak modern isekai at its best world-building example falls short of a good fantasy story. Just look at Mushoku Tensei. Admittedly do have my problems with the disgusting underage stuff going on in this anime, and also with the confused storyline that doesn't really go anywhere. I think it's generally overrated, to be honest. Oh, stop it! It has half a season where the protagonist goes on a quest to awaken the sleeping dragon, by which I mean cure his erectile dysfunction, because his underage waifu left him. It has a really silly plotline, but it goes to show that people will watch anything if the characters and the world they inhabit are engaging. Rudius Greyrat gets Viagra, nominated as Best Anime of the Year, ladies and gentlemen. And despite everything, Mushoku Tensei is still a power and sexual fantasy, with the same flaws as most generic isekai, even with its engaging story elements. I'm aware that the books are the source of many isekai tropes, but it's still just a Japanese guy in a Dungeons & Dragons roleplay. The reason why Mushoku Tensei is so beloved by many, despite its serious problems, is partly because of its second chance at life theme, sure, but also because it's the current isekai that most explores its world, magic, lore, history, and characters. It's the one that, although not the most unique fantasy world, is still the kind of world that you want to explore. But it's the magic that really does it for me. It's not a game system with number stats that have no organic connection to a fantasy world. It's a mystical energy that works through intuition and connects with the elements. It requires an innate understanding about how each element feels. You get stronger with practice, yes, but the same way your body gets better at muscle memory and martial arts. It's something you become, not a level you acquire. It actually feels like mystical insight into space and time, or other living things. It actually feels like magic. Even then, however, the world isn't as fleshed out as a good quality fantasy story. In Mushoku Tensei, the magic doesn't affect how their society works as much as I feel it should. They can summon water and earth from their hands, and it's implied that everyone can do this with enough training, but that has no visible effect on industry, social class structure, living conditions, food production, or technological development. Wouldn't it be amazing to see a character be isekai'd into a better, more thought out and unique fantasy world like the Avatar: The Last Airbender universe, Fullmetal Alchemist, or heck, even Arcane. Worlds where the magic is actually an organic part of the setting. In Fullmetal Alchemist, it's revealed that society has to indoctrinate alchemists with a specific philosophical doctrine and heavily regulate alchemy, otherwise they'll transmute too much gold and wreck the economy. I love that tidbit. I feel like the stagnation of isekai as a genre or subgenre is mostly due to the aging of the core demographic that happened over time. All over the industrialized world, but in Japan specifically, the population has been aging, getting older. And naturally, the entertainment market has been catering to that older demographic. It's how in the 90s and early 2000s you had very popular children's books catering to 12-year-olds like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson that literally made the writers millionaires and even J.K. Rowling a billionaire. But now YA novels are catering to 40-year-old women with a high school bad boy fetish because children are less numerous than adults now in most countries with disposable income. This is probably why isekai has shifted from being about entering a new world of potential and new possibilities, but also danger, where a child comes of age and grows into something great by rising up to the challenge, like Grimgar, Fantasy and Ash for example, into being what it mostly is now. Now, isekai is famously about a second chance at life. It's about doing things differently now that you know better. There was so many things you wasted in life because you took it for granted, like the love of your parents or your youth. So much time that you pissed away, either in indulgence or a dead-end job. If only you could have another shot at life, maybe in a more favorable or more soul-nourishing circumstance. And believe me, I know in my bones that this is exactly what someone in their 30s would write, which happens to be the average age around the world. We're the majority now, boys! But the world doesn't revolve around you, and getting hung up on trying to start over is pointless. Not only that, but it's also never too late for you to change. A great YouTuber called Beghast made a video about exactly this a few months ago, that I'll link in the description. It has the video that inspired this one actually. As some of you may have noticed if you've already seen his video and thought I was ripping him off, but no, I'm just trying to add to the discussion because I don't fully agree with him. I think that although his conclusion is fantastic, it has negative implications for Isekai as a genre. His video is called How One Anime Fixed Isekai's Worst Issue, and he argued that Frieren is a story about an old elf waifu changing her ways despite her ancient age. It's of course not an isekai story, it's classic fantasy, so it becomes about Frieren and her journey through life, learning to appreciate her world. The nature of the magic system and the races of elves, humans, and demons are all part of her journey in an organic, self-contained whole. There is no modern Japanese traffic accident to disrupt things. Friren's inability to appreciate her friends is because of her long elven lifespan, and because her people have generally less passion for life, like no sex drive, for instance. So interpersonal connection doesn't have a biological boost to it. No, it has to be built entirely through interaction and emotional bonding, unlike for her human companion who is implied to have loved her romantically. And though there was no time for her to even have understood what that meant, much less reciprocate his love before he got old and passed away, his death was enough to shake her out of apathy. She was able to gain a new perspective on life and enjoy what she had been missing in a new life without getting hit by a truck, which led to Beghast's conclusion.
You do not need a second life or a second world in order to have a second chance.
Beautiful conclusion, and very true. The only problem is that it kind of completely destroys the isekai genre, which I guess is one way to solve the issue. Frieren solves the isekai issue by not being an isekai, and just being regular fantasy instead. After all, you don't have issues in isekai if you don't have isekai. And I'm sure some of you edgier bros in the comments think that's super based and the final solution to the weeb problem, but I actually think YouTuber Beghast does have a point that fantasy provides the solution to isekai's generic overpowered self-insert daydream fodder issue, but just in a different way. Isekai should replicate the best elements of the fantasy genre, because in reality, fantasy is about seeing the world through a different perspective. Fantasy creates a secondary world of magic, but it does so to explore the possibilities of space and time and the relationship between people. Like Tolkien once said, "What is Lord of the Rings? It's the mythologization of England." It was Tolkien seeing his civilization from a higher perspective. It was about godly traditional peoples of different culture and communities joining together to kick some godless modernist ass. The magic is related to nature and divine beings or demonic forces that are conniving industrialists trying to bring about a new centralized order under one greedy, all-consuming power structure. Tolkien hated allegory, but his fantasy world wasn't allegory about England, but a contemplation of England through myth. The United Kingdom has the Welsh, the Scots, and the Brits living together with different cultures and even languages, like Walish, I think it's called.
Dory. What are you doing? What are you doing?
But it also has a historical problem with over-industrialization and a history of fighting autocrats in Europe, so it's natural that this would inform Tolkien's work. What is Harry Potter? It was J.K. Rowling mythologizing the school experience, with students interacting with their teachers and each other, children growing increasingly aware of broader social conflicts, and how the legacy of adults is thrust upon young people who inherit a history they didn't ask for. The magic is a skill and ability to manipulate the world based on words and techniques that you have to study and master, much like the use of reading, writing, and mathematics, which prepares kids to become contributors to society. But political rivalry among adults makes the school an inevitable battleground for politics, and the neoliberal guys always win. What is Attack on Titan? It's a mythologization of the cycle of violence between different ethnicities. The magic is related to historical memory and trauma, and it turns human beings into monsters. And this is what Isekai can accomplish by adding a normal human being from our world that is plopped into such a well-made fantasy setting. It can be a way to look at one's life through a different and higher perspective, which is exactly what ReZero does, and why it's the best contemporary Isekai out there. No contest. except for maybe Uncle from Another World, but that's a parody of Isekai, so it doesn't count. In Re:Zero, the protagonist doesn't die, reality just shifts and he's in another world. Like the shifting of one's perspective, where he suddenly sees a world that he couldn't have seen before. It's pretty standard fantasy, but it actually has more unique elements to the setting. How many fantasy stories has like a flying Moby Dick plot arc in it? That was a fantastic arc. But the magic is the best part, because it utilizes a video game mechanic in a way that genuinely feels like it's a mystical and mysterious thing. And his character development is all about learning to see things differently, and there's some incredibly memorable moments where he dies horribly. And his main enemy that he fights is the Cult of Sloth, which is fitting since he was a NEET and a simp, trapped in a comfortable life, and he had to literally fight his sin in the form of an evil, cackling simp wizard. This is actual storytelling, not daydreaming, but a mythological perspective able to turn our struggles into archetypes. The trope of entering another world can be used to explore the different directions that one's life can go. The idea of the world changing around the character can symbolize how the world around us can change if we change our perspective, which is the true purpose of escapism. We must escape our stagnant, dull, materialistic perspective of the world around us, and stories, when done right, can give us a new one, so that after engaging with that story, we can come back to our world having learned something.
In your world, I have another name. You must learn to know me by it.
It's not about running away from reality by getting lost in daydreaming. You're not escaping anything that way. The soul-crushing reality of your life still bothers you, but you'll be better equipped to change things in your life if you see things differently. And that is the true point of escapism. As Tolkien once said, "Fantasy is escapist, and that is its glory. If a soldier is imprisoned by the enemy, don't we consider it his duty to escape? If we value the freedom of mind and soul, if we are partisans of liberty, then it is our plain duty to escape, and to take as many people with us as we can." And it's a similar logic with video games. They can be used to distract from our problems or as a way to train problem-solving skills or reaction time. And they also let us experience a new perspective of the world through close interaction with it. It's storytelling to the next level, and why it's so engaging and also extremely empowering, since the military uses virtual reality to train fighter pilots and soldiers. Video games can be the ultimate form of healthy escapism, since you can use it to keep your competitive skills sharp, meet new people, and genuinely have fun, which can definitely be healthy. But it's a pity that video games and consoles are getting so expensive these days. But not for you if you download Raid Shadow Legends using the link in the description. Thank you, my patrons. I would die without you, and I don't think I would get isekai'd. And thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.